A few months back, I talked about those He Gets Us ads where they tried to make Jesus sound like your best friend. And a lot of you wanted me to know that I'd made a huge mistake. I talked about Jesus as though he actually existed, and you wanted me to know that he did not exist. The writers of the New Testament just made him up out of whole cloth. And I want you to know that that's not true. That's one of those little fun facts that atheists and other non-Christians pass around completely uncritically. And I understand why. You know, I was raised as a Christian, and when I grew up and realized that it was all just a myth, I assumed that everything I was taught was a lie. You know, Jesus didn't have supernatural powers. And in fact, you know what? He probably didn't even exist at all. Sure. But this is a topic that actual historians have looked into, and the vast majority of biblical scholars, both Christian and otherwise, overwhelmingly agree that Jesus most likely was a real guy. Bart Ehrman, an antiquity scholar who has written about this topic a million times, points out that there are about 30 independent sources confirming that Jesus was a real guy. He writes, "We have 4 narrative accounts of Jesus' life and death written by different people at different times and in different places based on numerous sources that no longer survive. Jesus was not invented by Mark. He was also known to Matthew, Luke, and John, and to the sources which they use. All of this was within the first century. This is not to mention sources from outside the New Testament that know that Jesus was a historical figure. For example, 1 Clement and the documents that make up the Didache. Or, need I say it, every other author of the New Testament. There are 16 New Testament authors altogether, so 12 who did not write Gospels, none of whom knew any of the Gospels except for the author of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, who may have known the 4th Gospel. By my count, that's something like 25 authors, not counting the authors of the sources, another 6 or 7 on which the Gospels were based, and the sources on which the book of Acts was based, which were different again." He goes on to describe more evidence for all of this. I'll just leave it there, but if you want to learn more, as always, link to the transcript below where I include links to all of my sources. Even people who argue that Jesus didn't exist, like Bob Price, admit that they are in the minority of historians supporting a fringe theory. So yeah, Jesus probably existed. And I was thinking about all of this recently because this weekend is Easter, a holiday that I actually really like. I know I'm an atheist, but I have really sweet memories of celebrating Easter as a kid. The basket full of fake pink grass, the big chocolate egg filled with M&Ms, running around outside to find all the eggs we decorated. I even enjoyed going to church because I usually got like a new pair of shoes, like white patent leather shoes. And, you know, I'd ruin them almost immediately, but I enjoyed having them for the few minutes before I ruin them. And I love, in general, you know, the idea of welcoming spring. I even love the metaphor of Jesus's story, you know, the idea of rebirth and forgiveness and love. It's all pretty nice, considering the fact that this holiday kind of centers around torturing a guy to death. But I guess I kind of like that too. I'm a little morbid. But just like a lot of atheists uncritically believe that Jesus never even existed, a lot of us also have some unsupported ideas about the origins of the Easter holiday. Just like with Christmas, Easter has become less of a religious holiday and more of a commercial holiday over the decades. Walk into any Walgreens this weekend and you're going to see all of the stuff that I can still happily celebrate, you know, bunnies and chickens and eggs and flowers and pastel colors and candy. What does any of that have to do with Jesus? And, you know, just like with Christmas, the easy answer there is the pagans. As I mentioned in a video last Christmas, all successful religions borrow from other religions in order to get popular or stay relevant. And the Christians did get a lot of stuff from the religions of the people that they took over as Christianity gained in popularity. So it seems like a good story that we call it Easter and we do weird pagan stuff because the holiday is really based on a prior god or goddess like Ishtar. Ishtar kind of sounds like Easter, right? And apparently there's a meme that goes around every year, this time of year, claiming that there's tons of evidence for this connection. Although I only saw the version that has already been corrected by an Assyriologist named Megan Lewis. Ishtar, just for the record, is pronounced Ishtar, not Easter. She was the goddess of warfare, not fertility, and her symbols were the lion and the star, not the egg and bunny. But I'm sure, besides all of that, that meme is totally correct. So yeah, don't spread that around, please. But seeing that meme reminded me that I always heard Easter's origins pointed toward another pagan goddess called Eostra. Ostara, lots of different names. And the story I had heard was that there was a bird who laid beautiful eggs, but she always bragged about how great her colorful eggs were. So the goddess Ostara punished her by turning her into a rabbit. But then the now rabbit was so upset that Ostara felt bad for her and gave her back the ability to lay beautiful, colorful eggs, but only once a year in the spring to honor Ostara. Sounds good, right? But the only problem with that story is that it's probably not true. In fact, while atheists often falsely claim that there's no real contemporaneous sources that point to the existence of Jesus, we could accurately say that about the Ostara story. Like, we have pretty much no evidence that Ostara ever existed. I mean, of course she never existed. She's a magical goddess. But, we have scant evidence that anyone actually believed in, worshipped, or even wrote stories about any goddess named Ostara or Ostre or anything similar. And we have no evidence that she's connected in any way to our present-day Easter traditions. I'll admit that I fully bought into the Ostara story, and I was honestly shocked to learn that this story has basically one single source, and it's not a source that actually worshipped her. It's not even someone who lived in a time when anyone worshipped her. We know of Ostara only because of an 8th century English Christian monk named Bede, who wrote that the local pagans used to hold festivals in Ostara's honor each spring, but that with the Christianization of Europe, the practice died out before his time. And that's it. That's the source. 1,000 years later, Jacob Grimm of the famous brothers Grimm took that description and ran with it, asserting with no real evidence that Ostara's festivals directly connect with Easter and are the reason why we do so much weird shit to celebrate Jesus dying, like how we all love to eat pastry of heathenish form. That's a direct quote from Grimm's book, and FYI, it is now a permanent part of my family's Easter traditions. Note that we have one other clue that Ostara did exist. In the 19th century, 150 inscriptions were found in Germany that related to 3 goddesses that seem to have been known as the Matronae Austriacenae, which linguists say could be related to Ostara, but there's no proof in that. So with that in mind, maybe this goddess did exist as a being that pagans worshipped. Maybe Bede was right that they held festivals in her honor in the spring, but we have no evidence that any of that is connected to our present-day Easter traditions, especially considering that even Bede said that it died out before his time. It seems that the idea of Easter being based on an ancient pagan rite started in the early 19th century with Grimm. If you'd like to know more about all of this, Stephen Winnick at the Library of Congress went down the rabbit hole, so to speak, on the history of this misconception, which I found really interesting. So why do we eat eggs laid by bunnies to celebrate a demigod being tortured and killed every spring? Well, it's probably because all the things we associate with Easter are associated with spring in general and with rebirth, which is, kind of the whole theme of the Christian holiday. Eggs have been a symbol of rebirth for at least 2,000 years. Rabbits emerge into people's gardens in the spring. Lambs are born in the spring. And as for the bunny laying the egg and where did that come from, nobody really knows, but English folklorist Richard Sermon came up with a guess that I quite like, which is that, and I quote, "A hare's scratch or form and a lapwing's nest look very similar, and both occur on grassland and are first seen in the spring." So I don't know, maybe it all started because one very funny parent pulled a practical joke on their kids and convinced them that bunnies were laying eggs. But we don't really know. So to sum up, Jesus was probably real, even if he probably wasn't magical. Easter traditions are weird, but probably not based on a pagan goddess named Ostra or an Assyrian goddess named Ishtar. And the real holiday we should all be celebrating anyway is the day after Easter Sunday, known to the ancient pagans as Half-Price Candy Day. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you loved the video, please subscribe. And if you think the world could use more videos like this and you happen to have a few bucks laying around, head to patreon.com/Rebecca and join an awesome community of nerds like the people whose names you see on the screen right now. Thanks.